thinking of. That's my biggest concern with the traffic, actually, in that aspect.
Okay. Other discussion, questions, motions? Chair doesn't normally make a motion.
I will go ahead and do it, Mr. Chair. I think I've got this one down here. Mr. Chair, I move, let me find the right numbers here, that the commission deny design review 13-01 and variance 13-01. Would you like my rationale as to why?
Yes, absolutely. So there's going to be, we need to get all this stuff on the record.
And so, remind me if I miss one, because I'm going off of memory, I didn't write it down, but at least for me, it's the ownership issue is in question of the property as proposed for development, as well as there's no variance being requested in regards to the code section 16.41.10, section A, that calls for a second level to a building in the C1 core commercial area. And those are the two big ones for me.
Okay. Is there a second on Mr. Joyce's motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. I would make comment on that. I would suggest, and I agree with both of those two rationales, but I would suggest that we add in there a rationale, that's our interpretation, that the 164110 is an actual approval criteria, even though oftentimes purpose statements are not actual approval criteria, but the language there is pretty precise. I would suggest that we add that. And the ownership issue, I would suggest that we rephrase that to not being a completed application. People could look at that different ways, but that would be how I interpreted that. I don't know. That's my comments with respect to Mr. Joyce's motion, is that we modify those two things slightly, and I would, I guess, suggest to the commission that we also modify Mr. Joyce's to add a fourth piece, is that there has not been evidence presented on that would be sufficient why we would grant the variance that was requested, even the one that they did request.
Agreed.
Because they haven't shown that any of the criteria and aspects there, as I read earlier, aren't caused by the applicant. I mean, if we're doing my comments earlier, if they're doing a tear down, it is caused by the applicant, and that wouldn't be able to be met under this current design. But those are my suggestions. So procedurally, Mr. Joyce's motion is on the table. I would suggest we amend that. Is my comment. So I guess I will move to amend Mr. Joyce's, adding those two slight modifications to Mr. Joyce's. So we're going to do some procedural wrangling here, which I'm good at. So Mr. Joyce's is the motion that's on the floor. I've made a motion to amend Mr. Joyce's motion. If there's a second, we will consider the motion to amend Mr. Joyce's main motion.
I would like to second that.
Okay, so now the only thing on the table is for discussion right now, would be my motion to amend Mr. Joyce's motion. So there's discussion only on my motion to amend those two modifications to your earlier one. Is there any discussion on that? Do you have any problems with those? Are those both consistent with your thinking?
As I stated earlier, I don't necessarily have an issue with the landscaping issue, because I think it actually goes with the landscaping design of the downtown core. But I didn't bring my copy of the code. Which code section is that exactly?
Well, I actually pulled that right from the staff report when I was looking at that myself.
look at that.
Well, the landscaping requirement is just a pure statement that 7.5% of the site shall be in landscaping. And it's more of the variance criteria and how well they argue to why it's not able to be met.
Okay.
And that was why, I mean, I was obviously open to listening to any reasoning, but I asked the applicant, and there was no reason.
Consider the above criteria when designing
Yeah.
landscaping standards. Is that what you're looking for?
I haven't looked at that.
Yeah, it's 1640.
43. Yeah, 43 is what I was looking at.
Page 14.
The
I think staff is
7.5%, you're
exactly...
looking for where the 7.5% standard is?
Oh, that's not what I was looking at.
We're looking for the variance review criteria?
Yeah.
Okay, that's 1623020.
Page 43 of the staff report is what I read. I thought staff's
yeah.
findings here referring to us on, depending on the applicant's narrative on why a planning commission should grant the variance was appropriate, because they didn't give us any reasons, and there may not be any reasons, but that was why I'm saying on that one is, they haven't really given any reasons why, that.
I would state, based upon your comments, that you're right, that the statement from the applicant have not sufficed to meet the quota for a variance, although
You wish there wasn't?
I would say that I think that one could probably come up with a much better convincing argument that could meet those variance requirements.
So the thing on the table is still my motion to amend Mr. Joyce's original motion. We can just continue to discuss this, or if there's discussion on this is closed, we can vote to amend Mr. Joyce's motion. Okay. All those in favor of my amendment of Mr. Joyce's original motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying no. Thought there was there 5 or 6? 5 of us, 6 of us, 6 of us. Okay, it was 6. So then the motion that's on the floor is the overall main motion. There would be 4 basic rationales, being the completed application, the interpretation of 164110 as an approval criteria that was not met, and they didn't even ask for an invariance on that, and then the actual variance criteria were also not met. So this is the summary. Is there any discussion about that motion?
Question?
Okay. All those in favor of the motion to deny based on those reasons I just listed off signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, 6 noes, or 6 ayes on the denial, 0 noes. Okay. We'll close DR 1301, VAR 1301. New business. We have a request from a property owner, and I apologize to that property owner, I should have moved you to the front since we were dealing with a whole bunch of internal city stuff first. Request from property owner to consider modifying and deleting the development concept plan requirement from the annexation ordinance. Angie, would you like to go first? Do you have a staff report on this, or should I just go to the applicant?
This is Brian, I believe.
Yeah, I've
Okay,
got
Mr.
a
Brown.
memo, if I can
Brown.
find it here. Try to put this in perspective, I drafted a quick memorandum for you that, just to give you a little background in that our annexation ordinance was amended by text amendment in 2008 by ordinance 1294, which established the current provisions that are in it. And the process of amending our annexation ordinance actually started in 2003. and it was part of the city's periodic review process, which is the Department of Land Conservation and Development's requirement of every city to go through a, extensive process of looking at your comprehensive plan and adjusting all aspects of your city, your comp plan and your zoning ordinance, so that it meets the state land use planning requirements and the goals. And so in that, they adopt a plan of work for the city, and one of the plan of work items that were required in order to get our comprehensive plan and ordinances adopted were to amend our annexation ordinance to make it clear and more closely follow requirements and meet cities' needs. And so they give a lot of discretion to the individual cities and how you, because obviously there's a small group of cities actually that have voter approval of annexations. Most cities in Oregon do not. And so you have quite a bit of discretion of what you do with annexation ordinances. But in the process of going through that 5-year periodic review process, looking at our annexation ordinance and such, there was a rather extensive process that involved the council, the planning commission, neighborhood associations, even neighboring communities, and a citywide survey that was done to try to figure out what kind of changes to the ordinance, annexation ordinance criteria that we should be considering and doing. Of course, I wasn't here, and so that's why I went back to look at the staff report, which I included in the packet, just in case you wanted to see what kind of changes did they actually make to the previous wording. And when you look at that, the major thing that really got changed was this introduction of the concept that we have development agreements and development concept plan requirement based upon the mapped areas that you see in the current ordinance, which I've got attached. And you'll see that there's areas that say that if your property is located in this red area or the other color, I don't know if we gave you a map that was in color or not, but if your property falls in one of these defined areas, then you have to either do a development agreement or you have to do a development concept plan. And some of the areas that are designated outside the city limits in the urban growth boundary are as big as 65 acres and can involve up to 20 different individual property owners. And some of the recent requests that have come through City Hall in the past 3 to 4 years contemplating the possibility of annexation have been areas that are in the development concept planning areas. And the property owners, maybe one of the 20 property owners that are in these defined areas will come in and they'll say, well, I've thought about annexing my property, whether it's their individual property or with the thought that, oh, I want to go together with some neighbors and we have some potential thoughts of development in mind. So the first thing they need to do is develop what basically is an infrastructure concept plan for the entire defined area that's on that map. So in this particular instance, the property owner that precipitated this request on your agenda is located at 1701 South Ivy Street, which is just adjacent to 2 lots that were recently annexed by a vote of the people, just adjacent to his property for use for Hope Village in their future development expansion plans. So Hope Village annexed a 4-acre tract and 2 other lots, and so they're planning this multi-building expansion area in that particular. So this property that's adjacent to that is within that same development concept planning area. Hope Village utilized a section of the existing annexation ordinance called exceptions that allowed them to make an appeal, so to speak, a request for a waiver in front of the city council and explain why they felt like they could go through this annexation process without doing a full-blown concept plan for the entire 65 acres. And in their explanation, asking for that, which is the first and only exception we've ever had, explain the fact that there were lots of disagreements occurring within those 20 property owners. There was a previous concept plan by one of the other property owners that was causing some of the problems in coming to an agreement between all of those property owners. They had actually tried to annex themselves the entire area previously and failed. The voters didn't approve it. But there were outstanding issues that way, and then in the end, the council indicated that Hope Village, they would waive the requirement because of the simplicity of how their property could be served by gravity flow to existing city lines, back into the city limits, et cetera, and thought processes that any other land in this 65-acre area probably, not certainly, but probably would have to do a concept plan because we're not sure how sanitary sewer service is going to serve the remaining properties because of slope and gravity flow and those kind of things. None of this is certain because there wasn't a study done of any other properties. There might be some other properties that could still be served by gravity sanitary sewer into the current city limits. But we're not sure at this point. The current property owner, who is here tonight, basically balked when he found out that, oh, I'm going to have to try to come up with the expense of developing a concept plan for 65 acres or thereabouts before I can contemplate getting my less than 1 acre tract annexed into the city.
So you're saying there's essentially no practical way for a single parcel owner to go and get themselves annexed into the city?
When you say practical, if you're talking financial responsibilities to try to coordinate the creation of a concept plan, it makes it onerous. Doesn't make it impossible. It just makes it more costly and time-consuming for someone to try to get that done.
Mr. Chair, what would that number be, roughly?
No clue. I really don't have any clue what it, we have very little experience in people trying to actually implement. We have experience with 2 entities trying to do a concept plan. One was Hope Village. They went through a year-long process, spent thousands and thousands of dollars going through that process, and it failed. That's why they went to the council and asked for a waiver or an exception. But it is important to know that the ordinance anticipated there could be circumstances where you wouldn't need to do a concept plan, and they put that provision in the code. And so it's not impossible for some other applicant to make their case, whether it's because I can't afford it, to see whether the city council would approve a waiver. But on the other side, we have to know what was the reasoning that went into the code, and its primary reasoning was that they didn't want piecemeal annexation of less than 1 acre tracts at a time without thought of how the larger area would be served if it was annexed all at once. So the idea of piecemealing is, do you have adequate concept of what kind of infrastructure, streets, water, and sewer piping are the primary things that would be needed, not just for your little 1 acre development, but that would be adequate to serve 65 acres. And so one way to think of that is, if you can't get a gravity-fed sewer to serve your 1 acre tract, then we need to know that before we annex it, because maybe we need to build a sewer lift station that's going to serve the entire 65 acres. Or that knowing the land use in that 65 acres is going to demand a 14-inch water line going by your property. And so we don't want you to just put in a 6-inch line. It's those concepts, I guess. So I promised this particular applicant that I put it on the agenda under new business. It's not a public hearing, it's an item for discussion.
Mr. Burr, what's your recommendation?
Well, my recommendation is really to provide you information and see whether you would think that the onerous requirement to have property owners do this concept planning in place of the city doing it is reasonable. And when you look at the practical realities that the city is moving towards getting master plans done for these areas to be annexed, and the city is working towards updating our individual infrastructure master plans. So Canby Utility has completed a master water plan that is fairly new and up to date, so they should know what kind of water lines are needed in a 65-acre area outside the city. The city has not updated their sanitary sewer master plan, though, since, I believe, 1999 or earlier. And so we need a new sanitary sewer master plan. We're in the process of trying to get the Northeast Canby master plan adopted. The draft is there. We have to amend it because it wasn't approved by ODOT, and now we have a transportation system plan that solves that problem, and so we have to go back and amend the plans with the property owner's consent, because we're changing some land use in it. And then we're trying to get the next largest area in town master planned with grant funding so that the city can do these things up front so that individual property owners don't have to. But until we get that done, we're still at this issue of how important is it to have the concept plan done for the larger areas rather than piecemealing. And to me, that's your decision. And it was originally the entire community's decision that they didn't want piecemeal annexations. If you go back in history, there was a point at which every annexation in Canby was being denied. And that resulted in this annexation ordinance because they didn't feel comfortable that enough real long-term land use planning in these areas to be annexed was taking place. Well, the city is very poor, and trying to get to these areas outside the city and get them master planned is a very difficult task for the city as well. There's been 4 attempts by the city to do a master plan for the North Redwood area. And we've ran in with our limited staffing, all the property owners involved, the difficulty in doing true master plans. It failed each time. I wasn't here for any of them, but I've heard about it. And so we've been trying for 4 years now, since I've been here, to get grant funding to help get experts in here and someone that can take the buffer against 20 property owners that are at your throat because you're planning for something on their property when they're not even interested in annexing at this point. And the concept plan or a master plan says what your property will be good for and what you can use it for once it gets adopted. And so master planning can be very controversial in the end when it's finally adopted for an area. So it's not real clear for you, but what I did was I just gave you options. I said you can recognize the need for this development concept plan until we get our infrastructure plans or master plans for the areas done, at which point I think the ordinance is no longer needed and can be eliminated.
And Brian, this exception section, in your experience, it's not adequate to address?
It could be adequate. So that's option one, is that, hey, we've got this exception. It was used once before successfully. But if it's not granted, then yes, an individual property owner is going to have to get work on a concept plan for the larger area. In the ordinance doesn't tell us exactly what a concept plan should consist of, but it indicates it should address streets and the basic utility lines that are going.
Let's let this gentleman have his chance on microphone. You guys have so much technical expertise that it's obvious why we need you. And there's going to be a lot more complicated answer to this, but maybe we get a little bit of
Thank you.
first-hand experience with trying to deal with this or contemplating.
My name is Brian Christensen, and I live at 1701 South Ivy Street, and we are very close to Hope Village. And, you know, we're outside in that urban growth boundary, and I've been to these meetings, I've been to the concept plan meetings with Hope Village, and, you know, it's, financial is a real big deal. I mean, we're talking about a lot of acreage, and I own less than an acre. And so, you know, that's going to be a real big burden for me. Just getting the neighbors to get along to go with your concept plan, I mean, that's going to be a nightmare, because nobody wants to give up a piece of their land for a street or a park or you know, things such as that. I mean, it's really going to be next to impossible, I believe. And, you know, I'm stuck in this urban growth boundary, and I can't farm it. I can't make a living off from it. I'm upside down in it. I already have some zoning plans that I've received through the mail, and I don't have any plans on what my zoning is. I'm being told what that is as well. So not only am I forced to do this concept plan, but I'm also forced to go with the zoning that's crammed down my throat on this property as well. So, you know, I'm finding I have little choice. I have a lot of demands put upon me, and I'm just a little guy, you know. And this is all urban growth boundary, which is going to be in the city. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the city's coming out, and I know what he was saying about, you know, at one time they didn't want little bits annexed here and there because they weren't sure if they were going to go out that way, but they are. They're going to go out my way. And, you know, it's inevitable, but, you know, I know that I can't burden that kind of responsibility to do that. And to be quite honest, I don't know if it's possible. You know, I think it's going to take somebody in the city or somebody in a higher authority than me to decide where streets and sewers and those types of things are going. Nobody in the community is going to agree with probably anybody else in the community. It's going to take somebody from higher up, their guys' department, that's going to have to probably figure all this stuff out. And until we do so, I mean, it's just holding us back. I mean, I would really like to see some growth in Canby. You know, our property values are turning around. We've seen things being built now. It would be good to have more people here, more taxpayers, and we could build more houses and create jobs and all those types of things. But the way we're going right now, I don't see how we're really going to go anywhere out that direction.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Christian, what do you plan to do with the property?
Well, to be quite honest, I don't have any plans other than the fact to annex into the city, change to the zoning that's being proposed to me, and at that time, I know that zoning will more than likely increase the value of my property. So ultimately, my plans are to go ahead to get annexed in, see what happens to the potential of my property, and go from there. Right now, you know, like I said, I'm upside down, and I'm making payments, and, you know, I live there, but it's hard to swallow.
Trying to get some of that back.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
Nothing wrong with that.
Any questions for Mr. Christensen? Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Christian, do you plan on hooking up to city services?
I would not have a problem hooking up to city services. I would actually like to.
That's what I was wondering if you, and see, that, I think that's one of the problems, because, you know, like we were talking about, the reason why we give Hope Village an exception was because they already had existing hookups where they could hook in without any problems. But they said that if you move out, that might create a problem with utilities and stuff. So, you know, that's what I was wondering, if you hook up to utilities, that might be the problem.
Sure. No, I would like to, but to be quite honest, I'm self-sufficient now, and
Right.
so I'm fine with that. And if the city comes out and brings its utilities, I'm ready to hook up.
I would propose to the rest of the commission, if there's enough votes on this, that we have staff bring for just a work session and before us a discussion of the exception provision, just to take a look at it at one of our upcoming meetings, to see if we would want to maybe clarify the exception provision, to see if to make it more workable or modify it slightly, or just bring it under consideration. Is there a consensus on that? Bring it before us, take a look at it, see if it's something.
I could pass it, well, you have your code book too, but it's a one paragraph.
Can you,
I can pass it around if you wanted to take a look at it now. But
which one is it?
it's,
That's kind of related to my second option, which, you know, we could have a work session, a PC-led committee to further look at some sort of modifications of some sort, and you're suggesting maybe the modifications could come to this exception to either clarify when it would be appropriate to grant an exception or something along those lines.
Oh, okay.
When you have a property owner that is, one of the things that resonated with the city council in Hope Village's argument was that we're only trying to annex 1 acre out of 65, and you want us to concept plan the entire area, and we know exactly what we need and what we need to do, but trying to impose our concept plan on all these other property owners is next to impossible. And that's exactly what staff encountered in trying to plan for the North Redwood master plan area, although that was a little different process than annexation, because a concept plan is a lot less detailed than master planning is.
In looking at this code, I would definitely lean towards that requirement, or that suggestion, and that we take a look at this. If you guys got a quick chance to read this, there's only 3 grounds. There's identified health hazards, limited development potential, administrative errors. If those don't apply, which are probably pretty exclusive requirements there, then you're out of luck on the exception. So we might want to, I don't know what we would modify it to potentially, but we might want to, I think we should take a look at it.
I think it's worth a discussion, because I think you might as well bring the urban growth boundary in, like Mr. Christensen said, if we're going to ask that they all get together and do that, or some big company's going to come in and buy them all up and then do something with it. So it is onerous. However, I'll be honest, I think the city has to protect itself too, to ensure that we don't grow in a way that does not allow us to support that growth with regards to pumping stations and utilities. and
Well,
things
yeah,
like that.
you could have they go through the process, let's say they're successful, well, actually, there's enough checks and balances in that annexation process that somewhere along the line, either the Planning Commission and/or the council would ask the question, can it be adequately served with city utilities?
Right.
And if staff says, well, we don't know, or they haven't provided us enough information to prove that it can, or it would need its own sewer lift station. Well, that could be okay. There's properties that have their own, but it's not the ideal way to build a city with every property owner having to have their own individual lift station.
Right. No, and that's exactly my point, is, I think if there's a way to make it so that you can have the individuals come forth for annexation at the same time, master plan or concept plan it at least, But I think that's going to be the difficult nut to crack there, especially with no grant money.
Another option is to simply delete this requirement, which takes us almost, not quite, it takes us back to 2003 or 8 with the old annexation ordinance, although it's got some updated provisions and such. It's a different concept now. But that's the main difference, is this concept requirement. And if we deleted it, annexation would be a simpler process initially. But
My guess is that you could probably find some subject matter expertise to help out with that work session so that we're not reinventing the wheel and going back to 2007 and then basically creating the same problems that they worked to solve.
at this point, the only thing that I could think of doing is finding the staff report and the ordinances that were passed then to let you know, because as I said, it was completely the city's decision as to how they amended and how they wanted to go about annexation.
Yeah, I'd just like to learn from their decision so that if we do change it, we don't just revert back to where it was, like I said, causing unforeseen problems that, we're back here 5 years later.
And it is a delicate balance. I think that's why I leaned toward looking at the exception. If we've got a process for doing big ones, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, we can look at that. But you also need to have a process for small ones, because you got to have a balance between having every single time you annex, it be a jumbo annexation, and somebody mentioned some large corporation coming in scooping up land, and it always being something like a high-density housing on the outskirts of town, and then you never have any we have a nice industrial here, but we dealt with this when I was a city councilor in Hubbard. You had nothing around the entire boundaries of the entire city except for EFU farmland. And so you could not do, you were constrained. And you wouldn't want to have only one type of development available all on the outsides, or you'd have this like circular rainbow of rings where everything is the same thing around the different rings. And so I think you have a delicate balance of having some maybe small parcels coming in, depending on how you do it, and then the larger pieces that might be a more uniform development of the exact same type of zone. So that's why I suggested maybe looking at the exception, but we could look at the whole thing too, and just at least consider it, bring it to the table and do a work session on this. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding.
Yes, I think that's a great idea.
I think we have to officially vote on that. Brian, can we put that on the calendar for a month or two out? Whenever you guys deem you've got enough background for us,
And
to have a work
if
session.
you'd like, we can do we could even do an off-the-camera 6 o'clock work session or something rather than the 7 o'clock time.
Okay. And can we make sure this gentleman gets a notice of that when we do that, so Mr. Christensen can be aware and have some input?
I'd appreciate that. That'd be great.
Okay.
I thank you folks for listening to me.
Thank you for coming and giving input. It's important.
Thanks for sticking around.
If there's nothing else, then I'll call the meeting.
None for you. We got things.
Thank you.
Next thing, item number 5, any final decisions? We have none on that. Unless I see anyone interrupt me, we'll pass through that. Approval of the minutes for the Planning Commission minutes from February 11th, 2003. Anyone had a chance to review the minutes, have a copy of the minutes to their satisfaction? Hearing any objections there, is there a motion to approve the minutes from February 11th, 2013? Mr. Savory has moved to approve the minutes from February 11th, 2013. Is there a second? Charles, I think mine is probably in the same place as yours. It's about 2 months for the filing is going to be ways. I'm not hearing a second. Is anybody going to second it?
I don't even know what was to approve that a long time ago.
I don't have a copy.
I don't have a copy, actually.
That's why I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I don't have a copy.
I've got one, it's pretty short, actually.
Yeah, I don't have a copy.
That's easy.
Yeah, I don't think we have what we put in our
That's
books.
why I'm not seconding too. I wasn't sure if I was there. Smart.
No, that's fine, because I wasn't in there.
believe I was there, but I don't remember exactly what we did that far back.
It should be the last 3 pages in your book.
In the book for today's?
Yeah.
Oh, this is just approving the minutes from the, so this basically is just a minute to approve the minutes. I mean, you approve the minutes, right?
Oh, it is in the back of your,
With the blue one?
big one that was on the
Oh,
library.
I thought I'd seen it, but oh, yeah, here it is. Here it is. Yeah.
Look at it to me, I will second.
Somebody make a motion already?
Mr. Savory moved to adopt the minutes, I seconded. Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All were ayes. Any other interest, staff, anything that's short and abrupt for today's?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay. I'll just comment, you guys did such a good job. I want to compliment you too, and Laney, on dealing with these types of land use matters in a very sophisticated, neutral way. I think you guys do such a good job. I mean, I've seen, not to compare you guys, but I've seen, one of the COGs and how they do it. It's, the recommendations are always advocacy instead of, you guys do a very good job of giving the real deal and what the requirements are. And I want to thank you for doing that. It's
I agree.
obvious.
I agree. They've done a very excellent job in giving us the information that we need to make decisions and stuff.
Okay.
If you aren't aware, you do have a special meeting on May 28th.
Okay. And we still have items of interest, anything, items of agenda, new business from planning commission members. Anybody?
Not at 9:40.
That's 7:05 next time. Okay. Not hearing any other business, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Booker?
Second.
Second. All those in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourned.